Hello everyone and welcome back to Outmouse Labs. Today is going to be the second video going over making plugins in RPG Maker MZ. So I do have a previous video that we are going to be building on, so if you haven't watched that, please go ahead and check back on the channel and give that a watch first. So what we're going to be doing today is overriding a piece of the base RPG Maker MZ code to add new functionality. I will also describe the differences between aliasing and overriding, and go over how to find things in the core code that you might need. Everything we do today should be linked in the description below in terms of files, so if there's any questions or something comes up, please comment and I'll try to help you out if I can. Alright, with that, let's get started. So when you want to make a plugin, there are some questions you need to ask yourself before you even really open your code editor. The first thing is, what do you want the plugin to do? And can you do it with events? If so, would doing it with events be simpler? Events are really powerful and they're quick, and they're part of what makes RPG Maker, so use them when you can. Okay, once you've done that, go through the logic of your plugin. Sometimes this is called pseudocoding. Essentially, it's going through each piece as a logical step. In this case, we're going to be making a plugin that checks if a skill target has a certain state, and if they do, we're going to use their luck skill to see if they dodge the attack before we check if they evade the attack normally. This is modeled after the Uncanny Dodge skill from Dungeons & Dragons. It is a pretty simple plugin to make, and it illustrates all the concepts we're hoping to get to today. Plus, it makes the luck skill do something, besides provide a tiny block against status effects. By default, the luck stat is essentially useless in the engine, so it's nice to give it some oomph. So let's start going through our logical steps. First of all, check who has been attacked. Then check if the attack was a physical or magical attack. If it was a physical attack, see if they have the Uncanny Dodge state attached to the actor. Use a random number generator to roll a d100, so a 100-sided die. If the number on our die is lower than our luck stat times 0.25, or 1/4 of our luck stat, then the attack misses. If it's higher than our luck stat times 0.25, then we hand it over to the engine for the regular evade. If the attack is magic, we skip all that and it just uses the magic evade. Okay, so there's our logical steps. Now we can kind of get into the meat of it. So with that, let's turn to our code editor here. Let's go ahead and open up our code editor and navigate to the JS folder of your project. If you are not sure how to do that, I do go into it in more detail in the previous video in this series. What we need to do is figure out where the engine checks for evasion. You can try Googling it, going to the forums. You can also use the documentation for the engine. Sometimes, though, it's easier just to search the source code using the Control F, and that's what I did in this case, so we're going to take a look at that. If we weren't in the right spot, which we are actually not right now, we would be looking at our various core files. I'm going to go ahead and close the plugin section so that kind of makes it a little easier to see. So our core files all start with rmmz, then an underscore, and then a name. So I'm just going to hit Control F, and I'm going to look for evade. And I see no results, so I'm going to go to Manager. I see no results. I'm going to go to Objects. I see 6 results. Okay, so we're going to go to the first one, and it says result.evaded equals not result missed, and math.random is less than this item evade target. So we don't necessarily need to know what all this means yet, but we can see that result.evaded, that implies did they evade? Just like result.missed implies did they miss? So looking at this line, it looks like we have a raw check here, and then a random number check, and then we have this.item evade target. So this would suggest that the evasion is being checked against the item's evasion. This is probably what we want. So then I'm going to take item eva and copy that into my find. And I see there's only 2. Looking at the 2 options, this one is using a whole bunch of functions to do a lot of different things. You might be able to use this one, but if there's one that does exactly what you want to use that. So looking here, we have game action, which is the class that we're in. It's part of the objects file. We have the item eva, that's the function, and we have that it is a type of function that acts on a target. And what it's doing is, if the type of attack is physical, it's going to return the target's evasion. If the target's attack is magical, then it's going to return the target's magical evasion. If it's neither, it's going to return 0. This looks like exactly what we need. So what we're going to do is copy that over into a file and take a look at it, kind of separate from everything else. I like to just be able to look at just what I'm dealing with. So this is the same exact thing. We just went through it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going to go and look at my list. So check who has been attacked. Well, we have that. The engine gave us target. Check if it is a physical attack. Again, this dot is physical, so the engine's already giving us that. And then check if the target has the uncanny dodge state. Okay, so here's the first thing that the engine doesn't do. So this is where we're going to inject our own code to override the function. Let's take a look. Okay, so here is our plugin, and I've already put it together, and we'll go through it together. So I have named this one outmouse_uncanny.js because it's based on the Uncanny Dodge. It starts out looking exactly like what we did the other day. We have some comments that tells us what file we're in and the name. We have our target MZ so that we know it's an RPG-MZ plugin. We have the description and the author and one parameter. So remembering parameters are what the user can change in the plugin window of the editor. So we're going to call that uncanny state because it is a state that we're looking at. The text the user will see is uncanny state with a space, looks a little nicer. And the description is the state that will apply uncanny dodge. It's a number because it's an ID for a state, and the default is 32, but the user can change it to anything they want. I'm not going to keep going through the JSON docs here, so just remembering that everything in green is a comment, and that the comments at the top with the stars are how MZ editor shows the user what the plugin does. If you need support on that, please go ahead and check out my last video. I go into it in detail. Okay, so starting with the line after the // that means we're in the main part of our plugin. Just like before, we have a line that creates an object, which is a container that's going to hold our plugin, named outmouse_uncanny. The first thing we put in that is a variable called plugin name using the dot operator, which has to be a string, which means it's between quotations, and it needs to be the exact same name as the file. So outmouse_uncanny, if we look, that's the same name as the file. Then once again, we're going to get the parameters for the plugin. Just like before, we're going to add that to our object. We're going to ask RPG Maker's plugin manager to get all the plugins together and place them in the, we get all the plugins together for the plugin name. So all the plugin parameters in outmouse_uncanny. Then we're going to look at the uncanny state parameter. We're going to remind the engine that it's a number, and we're going to ask it to use whatever the user put in or the number 32. All right, next up, this is the first new piece. So everything up to this point has been review from last time. So overriding the item eval function from our MMZ object. So this is just a comment to remind me what I overrode and where I found it. To override something, you simply use the same name and put something new between the curly brackets at the beginning and end. Now be careful about overriding because you are changing the way the engine works. It's part of the reason we put it in a plugin, because you could just change the engine code, but then if you broke something or wanted to change something later, or somebody else made a plugin, it could ruin it. So you always want to put it in your own plugin. So we have the exact same name that we copied over. So game_action.prototype.itemEva equals a function, so the type of function has a target. So all of that is the same. Looking at our other one for a minute, literally that's just copy and pasted. Then if this dot is physical, that's the same. Here's where we have added our first thing. If the target dot is state affected, then we're going to do something. So where do we get this? So the target comes from here. It's the target that the engine tells us about that we are targeting with the skill. Is state affected is a function in RPG Maker MZ that requires an argument that is a number of the state, and it checks to see if the target has been affected by that state. How did I find this? Through the documentation. You can also use the console while running the game to kind of look around at objects and see what's there. But I do recommend getting used to the documentation and getting to know the RPG Maker MZ code so that you know that you have things like this function. So we're checking to see if it's affected by the state. This next line and all the ones that say console.logs, these are error checks that I put in. And I put a comment in so that I know to delete it before I release this. So we're going to say true if it is affected by a state. Then we're going to declare a variable. The let keyword means that this variable only exists inside the if statement, and that protects it from overriding somebody else's variable. So we're going to create a variable called uncanny chance equals target.luck. So again, the target from up here, it's luck stat times 0.25 to get 1/4 of their luck stat. We're going to go ahead and console.log, so we're going to get a view of that calculation to make sure it worked. Then we're going to declare another variable with let, d100, and math.randomInt with the argument 101 in the parentheses, that's just regular JavaScript. And it does exactly what you think. It creates a random integer, random whole number that is, between 1 and 100. You have to put 1 higher than what you want. So since we want 100, it's got to be 101. And that has to do with the way that JavaScript indexes. Just remember that you need to have +1 from what you actually want the top number to be. And again, we're going to see what we rolled, just for error checking. And then we have another if statement. Notice that these if statements are linked. So it's checking, is this true? Okay, well, is this true? Okay, well, is this true? And that's how we create the logic trees. So this one says, if our D100 is less than our dodge chance, so let's say our dodge chance was 20, if it was 19 or lower, then we're going to let the user know that Uncanny Dodge worked, and we're going to return 1. To let the user know that Uncanny Dodge worked, we're going to put it in the battle log. The scene manager is one of RPG Maker's classes, and the _scene_log window is the battle log window. And to that window, we're going to add the text, used Uncanny Dodge. You could put anything you want in this string. You could put clown shoes and it would show clown shoes. But I wanted to put something that might be useful to someone who's using the skill. The reason we return 1, return me in JavaScript means take this. I've done all the work and this is what I'm giving back to you. I'm returning this answer to you. The reason we do 1 is the way that evasion is calculated in RPG Maker MZ is it's 1 minus the number that's returned from this function, right? So if we return 1, it's going to be 1 minus 1. If the answer is 0 or lower, then the attack is dodged. So by doing 1 minus 1, it's always going to result in the dodge. And since what we want is 100% dodge rate, if you have Uncanny Dodge and under the luck roll, then that's exactly what we want. If the D100 is over our dodge or our uncanny chance, then it's going to do the regular evasion check. So there's still a chance of evading, but it's just based on the evasion check from the engine. If instead of being physical up here at the top, it is magical, it's going to do the, right here. If it's magical, it's going to return the magic evade. So it's going to skip all of this and just do the magic evade. And if it's neither a physical or a magic attack, that means it's going to be a certain hit or a none in the editor. It's going to return 0 because 1 minus 0 will always be higher than 0, so it'll always hit. Hopefully that made sense. You can always back it up or pause it. But again, what we did was we copied the function over from the main engine. And then we took the pieces that worked and we left those in, and then we added our own if statements and code to make it do what we want. Okay, I'm going to let this sit for just a second so you can copy over whatever you'd like to, and then we're going to jump over into the editor and see how it actually works. Okay. Alright, so over in the editor, there's a couple of things. First of all, it's dependent on a state. Well, I guess first of all, you got to turn on the plugin. So you would go to your plugin manager just like this. I've already got it on, but you would go to a blank spot, click here, and find your plugin. So it would be here, for instance. I'm going to hit cancel because I already have it, but I am going to open it up. So here in the window, we see the help file that we made. Remember, this is all the green comments at the top. We have the description and the author and the name, and then most importantly our parameter, which is the state that is going to drive all this. The default is 32. You could change it to anything you want. For me, 32 is perfect. I'm going to go into the database. I'm going to go to states, and I'm going to verify that 32, or the number that you choose, has the Uncanny Dodge state. And you can name this whatever you want, but that makes sense. So I put a name, an icon, everything else I've left the same. Make sure that it doesn't remove itself at the end of battle. It'll just save a little bit of processing for the common event later, because it won't have to do it as often. Alright, speaking of common events, you don't have to do this part. You can apply that Uncanny Dodge state however you want. It can be a skill that they use on themselves in battle and lasts for so many turns. It can be a item. Anything that can flip a switch, or I'm sorry, anything that can apply a state will work for you. In my case, I want the Uncanny Dodge to always be on once the player reaches a certain level. So what I did was I created an Uncanny Dodge common event with a parallel trigger tied to the Uncanny Dodge switch. Okay? If the switch is on, it's going to check if my rogue kid is affected by Uncanny Dodge. If she is, it's not going to do anything. Save some processing power. If she's not, it's going to apply the Uncanny Dodge, so now she has it. And I'm going to set this to wait 5 frames when it processes, just again to save a little bit of processing power. Okay? So that's all set. Finally, we're going to make a skill called Uncanny Dodge, and it does nothing. It's I put it in the special type so that they can look at it, but it has no scope, no occasion. It never actually does anything because it's a passive skill. And I tell the user that. Passive skill, it allows the user to dodge physical attacks based on luck as well as evasion rate. So they know that there's nothing to do with this skill. It's either on or it's not. Okay, now that we've got it all set up, let's take a look at it. Okay, so hopefully we can see everything. We're going to hit New Game. And I've just got a little test scene set up. We'll do this first. So our troublemaker is going to notice that Kid can learn Uncanny Dodge and turn on the switch. So behind the scenes, this just turned on the switch, and I gave Kid the skill in their Actor tab for testing purposes. Otherwise, what I might do is have them learn it at level 10, and then have the switch turn itself on, and there we go. You go in, and we're going to need to be able to see our console. So here is our console. When we attack, well, we're going to actually sit. Alright, there we go. So we're going to guard. Alright, so they tried to attack. I don't know if you saw that it said use Uncanny Dodge. If we look at our console, we can see that it was true. The Uncanny Dodge state was on Kid. They had a 249% chance, or 249 chance of it happening, so they had to roll under 249. D100 was a 4, so they used Uncanny Dodge. Now I've got Kid's luck on really, really high, so it's going to do that every time. So we'll do it one more time. Uncanny Dodge, and it will miss every time that happens. What we're going to do now is go and change the luck of Kid to a more normal number. So we're going to change it back to 39, which is the base. And now when we go back into the game, you'll see that they still have a chance, but it's only about a 7% chance now. Turn on our skill. Go into our test fight. Guard, guard. So, in this case, they had a 9.75% chance, and the die rolled a 19. So since it was over, it hit. Alright, that is it for how this works. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. I'm happy to try and answer them. Again, this was a pretty simple plugin, but it really does show how to override from the engine and make the engine do what you'd like it to do. Real quickly, I do want to mention aliasing. Aliasing is similar, except for you make a copy of the original function, you put that inside of your object, and then you run that copy before you do your new stuff. This is great because it protects your code and the engine's code, and you want to do it whenever it's an option, and it's an option as long as you want everything to happen normally plus new stuff. But since I wanted to change how it worked, I had to override it. There's nothing wrong with overriding, just know that it's a bit more risky, and to alias when you can. This gets even more powerful when you alias classes, which was going to be the topic of our next video. Thank you and happy game making.